There's a reason almost every New Year's resolution dies by February. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of discipline. It's the size of the goal itself. Lose 30 pounds, write a novel, build a business, save 6 months of expenses. All of these sound inspiring on January 1st, and by January 20th, most of them are already abandoned. Gym memberships peak in the first 2 weeks of January and quietly empty out by the third, a pattern so reliable that fitness chains actually plan their business models around it, overselling memberships because they know most people won't show up past week 4. Think about your own history with big goals for a second. How many times have you started something with real, genuine excitement? Not fake motivation, actual belief that this time would be different, only to find yourself a few weeks later quietly avoiding the thing entirely. Not because you stopped caring, because something about the size of it became unbearable to keep facing every day. Here's the strange part. The people who actually succeed at long-term change almost never look impressive in the moment. No dramatic before and after, no overnight transformation. Just small, almost invisible steps, repeated so consistently that by the time anyone notices, the change is already permanent. There's a word for this, a word that quietly built Toyota into one of the most efficient companies on earth, and just as quietly helps ordinary people escape burnout, anxiety, and stuck habits without ever trying hard in the way we've been taught to. The word is Kaizen. And here's the question this book is really asking. If big goals fail so consistently, why do we keep setting them? And what if the answer to lasting change was never about trying harder at all? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to see your own stalled goals differently. Not as failures of willpower, but as a sign you were using the wrong tool the entire time. Most of us were taught the same formula for change. Set a big goal, feel motivated, push hard. Repeat until it sticks.
The problem is, your brain doesn't actually work that way. Sarah Harvey's book on Kaizen draws on a well-documented finding in neuroscience. Big, sudden goals trigger something called the amygdala's fear response. Your brain, wired for survival, treats large, unfamiliar change as a threat, the same way it might treat physical danger. And when it senses threat, it shuts things down. Not because you're weak, because you're human. This is why willpower alone so rarely works long-term. You're not fighting laziness. You're fighting a biological alarm system that was never designed to let big changes through easily. Think about the last time you tried to overhaul your entire diet overnight, or wake up at 5 a.m. after years of sleeping in. For the first few days, it feels almost euphoric, pure motivation. And then, without warning, the motivation evaporates, and you're right back where you started, except now with the added weight of feeling like you failed. So the real problem this book solves isn't how do I get more motivated? It's how do I change in a way that never triggers the alarm in the first place? If you've ever started strong and quietly fizzled out by week 3, that wasn't a character flaw. That was your amygdala doing exactly what it's built to do. Here's where Kaizen flips the entire model. Instead of asking, what's the biggest change I can make? It asks the opposite question. What is the smallest possible step I could take that my brain won't even register as a threat? Not run 5 miles a day. Instead, put on your running shoes and step outside for 60 seconds. Not write a novel. Instead, write 1 sentence. Not declutter the entire house this weekend. Instead, put away a single item before bed. This sounds almost embarrassingly small. And that's exactly the point. A change this tiny slips underneath the amygdala's radar entirely. There's nothing to resist, because there's nothing threatening about putting on shoes for 60 seconds.
But here's the twist most people miss. The goal was never really about the 60 seconds. It's about proving to your nervous system, over and over, that change is safe. Once that trust is built, the size of what you're capable of doing quietly starts to grow, not because you forced it, but because the fear response stopped firing.
This is why Kaizen isn't a productivity hack. It's closer to negotiating with your own biology on terms your biology will actually accept. You've probably heard just start small before as generic advice, but Kaizen gives it a shape most people never apply correctly. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes. They start small, and then the moment it starts working, they get impatient and jump back to something big. 2 minutes of exercise turns into, okay, now I'm ready for the full hour, and the fear response reactivates immediately, and the whole habit collapses again.
The book insists on something counterintuitive. Stay small far longer than feels necessary, almost uncomfortably long. Because the goal in the early stage was never performance. It was building a habit loop so automatic that your brain stops treating it as a decision at all. Toyota's original Kaizen system worked the same way on factory floors. Instead of massive annual overhauls, workers were asked to suggest tiny, continuous improvements, a slightly better tool placement, a 2-second faster process, a single bolt moved an inch closer to where a hand naturally reaches. None of these looked impressive individually, but compounded across thousands of workers over years, they transformed the entire company into one of the most efficient manufacturing operations in the world. Your own life works on the same compounding math. A 2-minute daily habit, kept for a year, isn't a 2-minute habit anymore. It's an identity. And identities, unlike motivation, don't need to be resummoned every morning. They simply run quietly in the background. Here's why most self-improvement advice quietly backfires, and Kaizen explains it clearly. We're taught that shame and pressure are motivating. Beat yourself up for missing a day and you'll try harder tomorrow. But the book argues the opposite is true. Self-criticism activates the same threat response as an oversized goal. It doesn't build discipline. It builds avoidance. This is why so many people quietly stop tracking a habit the moment they break their streak. Not because they don't care anymore, but because the shame of failing becomes more painful to face than simply not trying at all. One missed gym day turns into a missed week, turns into a quiet decision never to mention the goal again. Kaizen treats a missed day completely differently, not as a failure to be punished, but as data. What made yesterday harder than usual? Was the step still too big? Did life simply get in the way? And if so, is there an even smaller version of the habit that could survive a hard day? The response isn't guilt, it's curiosity, and a slightly smaller next step if needed. This reframe matters more than it sounds. You think the problem is that you're not disciplined enough, but maybe the real problem is that you've been treating small stumbles as proof you should quit, instead of information about how to adjust.
There's a deeper psychological principle running underneath all of this, one the book returns to constantly. Confidence doesn't come before competence. It comes after small, repeated evidence of capability. Most people wait to feel confident before they start. But Kaizen reverses the order entirely. You take the smallest possible action, succeed at it because it was designed to be unfailable, and that tiny win becomes proof, real lived proof that you are someone who follows through. Do that enough times and something shifts. Not motivation exactly, something quieter and more durable. A trust in yourself that survives bad days, because it was never built on big dramatic wins in the first place. It was built on hundreds of small ones, stacked so gradually you barely notice the climb. This is the piece most goal-setting culture leaves out entirely. We chase confidence through hype and pep talks, when the book argues confidence is actually manufactured through repetition, the same way a muscle grows, invisibly, rep by rep, long before anyone can see the difference in the mirror. Think of someone learning a language. Nobody feels confident after one lesson, but after the 50th tiny, forgettable session, something has shifted that no single session could have caused on its own. Kaizen argues your entire sense of self works the same way, assembled quietly, session by session, whether or not you're paying attention to it happening.
And this connects to something the book calls the question of small questions, a technique borrowed directly from the original Japanese business philosophy, used to solve problems that feel too big to touch. Instead of asking, how do I fix my finances, which is so overwhelming it triggers avoidance, Kaizen asks something almost absurdly modest. What is one small question I could ask myself about my spending today? Not a plan, not a budget overhaul, just one tiny, non-threatening question. The book's insight here is subtle but powerful. Big problems don't actually require big first moves. They require a question small enough that your brain answers it honestly, instead of shutting the conversation down entirely out of fear. Ask, how do I fix my whole career? And you'll freeze. Ask, what's one email I could send today? And you'll probably send it. This technique works because it separates the size of the problem from the size of the response. The problem can stay enormous. Your engagement with it on any given day never has to be.
There's one more piece the book insists on, and it's the one most self-improvement culture actively works against, a practice called Hansei, roughly translated as structured self-reflection. Modern productivity culture treats looking backward as a waste of time. Keep moving forward. Don't dwell. Eyes on the next goal. But Kaizen argues that without regular reflection, you're just repeating the same small step blindly, with no way of knowing whether it's actually working, or whether it quietly needs adjusting. Hansei isn't about self-criticism, even though on the surface it might sound like it. It's a short, honest check-in, often just a few minutes, often just a few questions. What actually happened this week? What got in the way? What's one small adjustment worth trying next? Not judgment, just information, gathered on a schedule instead of left to guesswork. Here's why this matters more than people expect. Most habits don't fail because the habit itself was wrong. They fail because nobody ever paused to notice they'd quietly stopped fitting real life, and by the time anyone noticed, the habit was already gone. A 5-minute weekly Hansei check-in catches that drift early, while it's still a small correction instead of a total restart. This is the piece that turns Kaizen from a one-time trick into a system that keeps working for years. Small steps plus small, honest check-ins, compounding together. Here's the deeper message underneath everything in this book. We've been taught that meaningful change requires a dramatic leap. Quit the job, join the gym, overhaul the diet overnight. And when that leap inevitably collides with our own biology, we call it a personal failure, and we try again next year with an even bigger leap. But Kaizen suggests the leap was never the answer. The smallness was never a lesser version of change. It was the actual mechanism by which lasting change happens at all, the only kind your nervous system will fully accept without fighting back. So the uncomfortable truth is this. If you've spent years starting over, the problem was never your commitment. It was the size of the door you kept trying to force yourself through. The real question isn't what massive change do I need to make this year? It's what is the smallest possible step I could take today that I genuinely cannot fail at? That's Kaizen. Not a leap, a single, almost invisible step, repeated until it quietly becomes who you are. The engineers who built one of the most efficient companies in the world didn't do it with dramatic overhauls. They did it by trusting that small, boring, repeated improvement beats intensity every single time. Toyota didn't become what it is through a single genius decision. It became what it is through a culture that valued the 2% improvement as much as the breakthrough. No goal-setting app is going to hand this to you. No motivational video is either, because motivation was never the missing ingredient. What's missing is usually just the size of the first step. The question now isn't whether you understand Kaizen. It's whether you're willing to make your next goal embarrassingly small. Small enough that failure isn't even possible, and let it grow from there. If this changed how you think about starting over, subscribe for more breakdowns like this one. And drop a comment with the smallest step you're willing to take today. And if you want to see how this connects to building a life you don't need to escape from, watch the video on screen now. It picks up exactly where this one leaves off.